Okay, now I'm going to do one on a fairly rarely spoken of Egyptian king during the earliest of dynasties. It's known as Seth Peribsen. He's also known as Ash Peribsen, and this shows you a connection between ash or ash trees and the idea of the phoenix and rising again with Seth, who is said to be a redhead, and this has an idea with Fowen and what goes along with that, but he's listed as being Ash Peribsen or just Peribsen or Perabsen. Now, the Sarek name of an early Egyptian monarch or pharaoh who ruled in the second dynasty of Egypt. So this is just the second wave of kings that had went, and the first dynasty of kings, of course, came from the idea of Osiris, and that had come before that. But this wasn't really worshipped as being the rebirthing king until like end of fourth, start fifth dynasty, I believe, is whenever they pulled off this. And I've said before that it has a lot to do with ancestor veneration. For later, Hotep himself, also from the earliest of dynasties and starting to create the pyramids and stuff, gets, due to his divine knowledge, gets venerated as a god of wisdom and things. And in later dynasties, of course, not just directly after, but this first dynasty was a definite Horus related or falcon dynasty, and I've showed you connections that go with that in the Sumerians and how they have this falcon-headed god with the pine cone, and how that comes for a period and goes in older times, and then a recollection is called about it. And people have said that's the zoo bird and all these other things, but there's a connection to these Shemsu Hor and these falcon eye gods and the followers of Horus and how it connects. And let's get into some of this information, and then I'll deviate more as we go. His chronological position within this dynasty is unknown, though. In the second dynasty, he's in there second, third, fourth. They're not sure, and it's because of who became before and after. And of course, this list is kind of messed up, and later lists mention people that aren't found necessarily, and people have made a lot of conjecture out of it that what you're actually seeing is different names of the same person, and it's not his throne name, it was his name, or his given name, or his change name, or his Seth name, or his Horus name that you're looking at. And sometimes they're finding that what you're calling two different people that happened apparently back to back in short reigns are actually the same person. Sometimes he's named this, sometimes he's named that under the gods. And it almost seemed like they had a problem keeping it intact at first, for there would be a Seth name maybe in the south and a Horus name in the north, or vice versa, and so on, that you would find on something. And it really correlates to priests and things that hooked up with that in temples. For if there was a temple of Isis, then he would have a name that would go along with that, definitely. And of course, Isis goes along with the whole story of Osiris, and then her having a somewhat virgin birth, for he was dead and already become a god, and she had sex with a god to create her child Horus the Younger. So Peribsen name is unusual in that Set and not Horus was his patron deity. This goes against the Egyptian tradition of a king choosing the falcon-shaped deity Horus as his royal patron, and that's, of course, just the first of dynasties, so it could be somewhat a shifting of the guard, but they do find the first of the second dynasty still having the same epitaph, so it doesn't look like it's going to be this dynasty is this and this is this and so on. And they don't have a full pantheon yet in any way, shape, or form. I have to mention that in the onset. As I said before with Osiris and everything else, they have a much more smaller pantheon at this time. And there's just a god of rebirth situation and a sun god that they are having worship on, and then Horus becomes that variation of that winged sun disk. It's the same thing as Mythra and the same thing seen in Sumerians. and it has connections. Oddly, though, the sun god of the Sumerians was called Shamash, and through the whole crescent he gets changed a little bit, but sometimes it's Sh and sometimes it's not. So Shamash can become Samash, and Samson, or the son of God who rolls through the zodiacs, and we've talked about that. That's a recollection of Hercules and his 12 trials that goes with the same 12 zodiac. 12 is real important, and you see that in the Bible too, with how many disciples he has, and very, very many correlations. Also symbolic things like 40 years and so on, right? Well, 40 years is the length of reign that many people say is what Osiris lived. Now, in this tale, though, that they're giving, this Seth character correlates to Seth in the Bible. And most people have set Seth aside and don't even pay attention to it, for there's Cain and Abel. Cain slew Abel and da-da-da, and all these things come from it and everything. They don't get the gist that the idea that Seth was the one that was created that did not do the bad, and he went on from there, right? Now, Seth is correlated, or Set, both are the same thing, are correlated with the god Typhon. And I don't think it's going to show it here. Yeah, Set, or Seth, is the god of chaos, fire, deserts, trickery, storms, envy, disorder, violence, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. And why would that be? An ancient Greek god's name is given as Seth. And if you look, if you did it in Greek, it almost looks like Enos, like Enoch. But that is Seth, and that egg with a line in it is a consonantive. Set had relatively positive role where he accompanies Ra and his solar bolt to repel Apep, which is the serpent of chaos, and he had a vital role as a reconciliatory combatant. So Set is actually seen as being bad because supposedly the way in most of the stories go, and the one everybody grabs and pulls through, is that Horus and Set had a battle, and he kills Osiris, and he has a battle with him. Now this is a theogony battle, right? And he kills him, and that's the sun going down, by the way. This is all just a symbolic of this. Now, whether it happened, and this is the idea of Menes and things like that, or somebody coming in and taking over, and whether he was a foreigner to the people, even though he became their ruler, is the other issue. For really all we have is 12 hours of sun, or 12 Horus of sun, and its declamations, and then the sun sets every night. And this is in a winged disc, which later becomes, whenever horses show up in chariots, becomes a chariot of fire going across the sky. And we know these stories all too well, and Icarus and these things, right? Hopefully we know them, or at least a good mention of them. So this idea that when the sun sets, that Horus dies, but then he gets reborn the next day. You don't see him. He goes into the underworld. What's the underworld? Oh, it's unknown, but it's up under us all. And this is the idea that hell's down below you and things like that. And while it's day here, it's night there. And while it's night here, it's day there. Somebody could simply see the light from an only fire at nighttime and hold up a gourd and say, okay, well, this side's lit now and that's not. And if I spin it around, then it is too. And here we have the sun idea. Whether they exactly have the idea that we're spinning around the sun slowly, but we are spinning like a basketball on a finger at this point totally, or if they think the sun keeps coming across, which is what it looks like, is a little different. But it makes no total difference to this idea, right? But I have to mention too that even though that they've got it in their pantheon that he kills Horus, and then Horus comes back again as Horus the Younger or whatever, and he's reborn. Now this is a reborn sun god. This is like Ra gets reborn as Atum or so on, and it keeps happening again. And though he dies every day, it's something that's just got to happen. And it looks like that, even though we're still looking at the last of animism and some early primordial thoughts by prehistoric people blended into their religions still, there's this idea that sun come up, moon go down, world spin round and round, and it happens. It's a perpetual thing. It changes through the seasons, and I've talked about stories of seasons and winter equinoxes where the sun sits still for 3 days and rises again to save us all, and all these things that go into primordial stories that are attached to people quite often. And in this idea that he is attached to Horus and the solar boat, Seth with him going across the sky, but that how maybe he had gotten power is from originally killing Osiris. So we can see almost a similar correlation to the idea of the Titans and the other gods and how it ran through, but it's done on a daily basis. For the sun dies, and then it reborn, and it dies, and it reborn, right? And when his eye is upon you, you can't see any stars whatsoever. And once it goes down, then it changes. And then Venus heralds the dawn, for dawn is a woman's name who heralds the sun coming up, and it all goes again. And there are strange stories where Venus and its evening star and its morning star are two different entities, and that they are yin of yang of themselves, and bright and morning star and Satan, and stories out of the Bible. And man, I could just go off in left field for hours and not even get a good paragraph into this. But what's strange is you see this inclination, and it does have something to do with a foreign ruler and stuff, but it's at the origin of everything. Well, is it foreign just because it's different than? Is it not foreign that it starts off with this Horus thing in the first place? But if that's well adapted, then is this foreign to it? Well, one way of looking at it, too, is that they didn't have a pantheon altogether, and this type of actions running through earliest of dynasties developed the idea of kind of the picture they put into these stories that end up coming after with, and it kind of fits with what happened, and it kind of as above, so below in the sky, right? And this is way at the earliest of times, 2890 BC, somewhere between 2890 and 2686, because they know the ones on the perimeter, but they can't figure how it goes, and it seems the one before him had gone away. And people have made all kinds of connotations that, he killed somebody and took it, and then that's the idea that he killed Seth, the Horus. And if that person was a Horus worshiper, then he has that. There are other connections too that says that, well, no, he's Typhon, that hook up with the Greeks and everything, and because he's a redhead, because Typhon was a redhead, he has that look, like you see in Ginger, the earliest pre-dynastic mummy they find in Nakata, and that they may have already had a religion in a way that blonde-haired people are a product of this god, and redheads are a product of this god, brown or black haired are a product of these gods, right? Are beloved of it. Because when you find others like Ramses, who is hooked up to Rams or Aries, and Aryans, if you will, and Seti, which actually means beloved of Seth, it's real common that it goes on later too. And then you see it again kicked off in the Hyksos dynasty. And that seems to fit with that whole idea of foreigners, and perhaps redheads too. But does that say that the Egyptians aren't redheads? Oh no, we found lots of these mummies that have redhead, from auburn to ginger and so on, and blondes. But they seem to be worshiping certain deities, and it's almost by their hair color. In fact, they find the giant necropolis out there that they've been working on for many years now. Hundreds of thousands of bodies they found, and what's weird is in one area is all blondes, in one area is all redheads, and in an area is brown and black-haired people, separated not by families, but by hair color, which is also another interesting and telling thing that probably isn't showing up in much literature at all that we find. Peribsen tomb was discovered in 1898 at Abydos. It was well preserved and showed traces of restoration undertaken during later dynastic periods. They say it looks like it kind of caved in and somebody went back and built that back up again and how they can tell it is it's some old and some new bricks, or newer bricks, and therefore that's it. In fact, they pretty much made the better bricks out of it and used them versus the elder mud bricks that had started to go away and crush and crumble. So he has a vase that's here that's given to him that's really that type of vase that you see made out of the stone and urns and everything, but it looks like this maybe have done a little bit more haphazardly, for it's not as well defined, but it has some of the earlier writing on it, and on it is this creature that is not Horus, but it looks like what they call the Seth animal, right? And so when we look at that, it shows something odd. Now, they have a stele that they have found that's here, and their writing is pretty much worn off of it. And they believe it was purposely dulled out of existence, and in fact, you can see that the top four-legged creature has been pretty much marred off of it. And so there's an idea that in a lot of these earliest dynasties, the reason we can't find back to it is because they had problems. And whenever they did, they just took somebody's name just off the list. This was really done to Akhenaten too, and King Tut, and we almost didn't even know anything about him. And it's amazing that if it's the one that's hidden that we didn't know anything about ended up being the most prominent, what would we have been able to know about the ones that were so prominent, as in Ramses the Great and so on? And it drives Egyptologists. But the Serek for Peribsen was found in earthen jar seals made of clay and mud, and inscriptions on alabaster sandstone, porphyry, and black schist vessels that they had. The seals and vessels were excavated Peribsen's tomb at an excavation at the site up in Elephantine. One clay seal with Peribsen's name was found inside the Mastaba tomb K1 at Biat Khalaf, and this is earliest of dynasty tombs that they have. This is pre-dynastic to any pyramids. They're still mastabas, mimicking the ancient Sumerian ways, and so on, the size of bricks. Two large tomb stelae, that one that we see over there, made of granite, were found at his burial site. Their shape is unusual, that they appear unfinished and rough, and people have made a lot of conjecture about this, but in a slightly earlier tomb in the first dynasty, they have found one that not looks like a blade of flint like this, but almost like an arrowhead version of a worked stone that's 2.5 feet tall. I mean, it's pretty damn big. It's not an arrow that anybody would be able to use, arrow of the giants, or something. Whereas this almost looks like a blade, but it doesn't have a flinted edge to it. Almost a gigantic tongue depressor. But it's definitely been worked. I mean, surfboard, if you will, right? Now, they are fear somewhat unfinished, or there's conjecture that it was somewhat finished, but maybe not perfect at one time, and then someone had marred it away at a later date and all kinds of things. Egyptologists suspect that this was done deliberately, but the reasons are unknown, and it may have been from this Seth and verses and things like that, and people looking back. Just like, Christian zealots went over there and smacked up a bunch of statues because they were the one that had held the Christian people in, Egypt bad, right? And we know now that kind of didn't even go down that way, but those religious people, they can get quite out of hand. A cylinder seal is of unknown province, shows Peribsen's name inside a cartouche. So this is an early cylinder seal, very much like the cylinder seals that are seen in the Sumerians, and they still have them through these first dynasties. And of course, a very similar ideogram writing that's coming out of it, but then cuneiform, which is identical to those people over there. They have that same type of writing, and the Hattusians and the Fertile Crescent. I don't know why people don't make more connections out of it than they can, but You know, lapis lazuli and those things all come from up there and so on too. A cylinder still of unknown provenance, though, shows his cartouche, and that's a little strange to have a cartouche, which it gives the epithet of Marj Netjeru, which means beloved of the gods. And so there's a definite pantheon going on there. Now, how big of a pantheon is a little bit left up to discrepancy still at this point. This arrangement leads Egyptologists and archaeologists to the conclusion that the seal must have been created later, though, in memoriam, because of the use of royal cartouches began long after Peribsen's reign. Other people say, nah, maybe he was the person that had that ring of rope that ends up being around the name, and that it became a thing for him not to put the name beside him or over him or around, but in the ring of rope that he has, and the cartouche blew up like a bigger balloon to encompass his name. And that's what we're seeing in that same ring of rope concept of idea, the alpha omega symbol, if you will, in some views, that you see on Mithras, you see in Sumerians, you see in a lot of places, and he's holding in his hand. A lot of people say it's a winged UFO and he's controlling it with that object or whatever you want to say, but that has that look to it. This arrangement leads them to believe, though, it's much later, and another seal of the same material shows Peribsen's name without a cartouche on it, but with the royal title Nisut Bidi, or King of Upper and Lower Egypt, instead. So this could just be a multiple title situation, or maybe it was trying to go bad and he put it back together, or at least signified that he had done so. But there's discrepancy in that too. Existing skeptical views about Peribsen's existence are based on Ramseid kings lists, and such as the Abydos kings list, the Saqqara kings list, the Royal Canon of Turin list, which all omit Peribsen's name, but here he is. These, however, are known to have been created nearly 1,500 years after his death, and several 4th Dynasty tombs of priests performing the funeral cult for Peribsen have been uncovered. So it all seems to go together, and it exists. These tombs report Peribsen's name correctly, and their existence demonstrates that Peribsen was seen as a legitimate pharaoh, not a subject to damnatio memoriae as Akhenaten would be. Damnatio memoriae means wipe out of existence, to say he never existed. That's happened a few times in history, and I guess I could do a video just on people that have attempted damnatio memoriae. One of the ones that's famous that we know is Akhenaten, and so on. Historians and Egyptologists therefore consider the possibility that Peribsen's name was actually forgotten over time, and that his name was preserved in distorted or misspelled form, perhaps later, or a form having a different meaning or connotation to it about that one. You know, that one back there, the Set, and how things had rolled down. Peribsen's royal name is subject to curiosity for Egyptologists because it's connected to the deity Seth rather than Horus, and was traditional for the name of a pharaoh. Traditionally, the Horus name of the king was written within a surek, and a surek is the cubit thing here that actually shows you a box below it. That box below it is actually the corbelled outside of a building, which also shows correlations to Sumerian bricks work, where they have this in and out form all the way around itself with the insets that are on it, right? Although it looks like each inset here also shows a false doorway, multiple gateway, false doorway. But that's what a surek looks like, and this is pretty much before cartouches, but you can see it's outlined and all around it too. It's just not that piece of rope situation. The image of the facade of the royal palace beneath the falcon representing the god Horus, and that's hieroglyphs. Instead, Peribsen chose to have the Set animal up top, representing Seth on his surek, although Peribsen is the only known pharaoh to have the Set animal beside alone over his surek. He is not the only king to associate himself with Seth, though. And here's my examples I was giving. Examples include 13th dynasty Pharaoh Seth Peribsen, 19th dynasty rulers that are famous like Seti, Seti II, the 20th dynasty king Set Nakht, and Aries versions of Ramses and so on. But it looked like he was worshiping by this time, and the later times, and even the ones they mentioned there were people worshiping multi-pantheons. But because it looks like it's keyed to that one, he perhaps may have also, like Seth himself, or Typhon, been a red-headed ruler. Now the debate continues on why Peribsen chose his name. Earlier theories favored the idea that Egypt was split into two realms during Peribsen's time, or that he was a heretic who sought to start over, listen, a new monotheistic religion with Seth as the only worshipped god. And everybody talks about how Akhenaten is always to be looked at as so favorable that he actually had created monotheistic type of ideas, and instead of going with this giant pantheon that we look at today as being somewhat equal of each other, he put them all down on a rung that almost didn't exist, and they were just helpers. And we can still see, though, there's a pantheon in the Bible, for there's angels and saints you ask for certain things that they are over, and it still has this aspect to it. It's just done in a different way. And these winged people and ideas that come from the earliest of dynasties actually are seen in Sumerians and a lot of other places, right? Now, however, newer evidence and evaluations tend to show that the Egyptian king was unified with upper and lower, as we just talked about before, because it does show it at least on that one chart, but witnessed a vast, profound reform during the Second Dynasty. Still impressions from tombs of this era reveal great changes in the titles held by high officials, and it shows you that a priest situation was running into the situation. Priests. Pointing to a reduction in their power, though. Further, so things are changing powers and guards, and we can actually look through the different dynasties and how it changes. And we can see that effect too with the power of the Roman Catholic Church versus the power of science for over 1,000 years, going through the Dark Ages and stuff and coming out of that. But this idea that Egypt might have been split into two realms and that he unified it, but he unified it under a monotheistic religion that was saying, yeah, look, the sun goes up and down and everything, but we're going to worship this creator god that erps up brand new earth and gives forth, bellows out clouds, that when the clouds come up, lightning can even form out of that. Clouds form rain, and all these things are possible through him, right? And this is definitely correlated to Seth of the Bible and Typhon of the Greeks. And I'll do one on Typhon of the Greeks, and I'll connect that to the Bible and this too, but I'm doing it from this point of view here, so we can see its connections in a different light, if you will. Further still impressions show that several deities were worshipped under Peribsen still, though, refuting the monotheism theory, but not necessarily so. For even the Cushites, whenever they show up there, that even the Greeks talk about all that they worship are two gods. They worship the god before, like Cronus and Saturn, and they worship a god after, like Zeus. And this is like the father and the son situation, and that's all they're doing, which almost gives an echo to the ideas of Dumuzi and the reborn sun god of the person before, and how later they attached it to Sargon. And Sargon's tales of being put into a bitumen-covered reed boat and floated downstream, just like Moses was supposed to have done. So you can see these echo around in different religions. And of course, people say the Bible just stole all that, but this is just a retelling of the same event. And it's trying to put it all together and variations of a theme and give this idea of typology that keeps happening over and over again. See, so like the God's face hovered above the waters. And then later there's an angel or God hovers above Mary and creates Jesus. This creation, this recreation, rebirth, resituation happens over and over again. And there's a time here that language is changing too. And we'll get into that right here. Other contemporary inscriptions indicate that Egyptian grammar was perfected during this time, in particular the earliest seal impressions with complete sentences dating back to Peribsen's reign. Thus, Peribsen's reign was in fact a time of cultural and religious advancement. And really, whenever you look at their earliest of things, it's actually ideograms put next to each other. And pardon me for saying it this way, but we might understand it as like the broken English that you would hear some American Indian have said a long time ago whenever he's trying to speak English, not knowing it too well, many moons ago, and he doesn't really put it together. But if you think about it, that's a whole lot more put together than their original ideograms that there were, for it just had house, big, run, river, and you're supposed to try to figure this out. The phonetics come in at this point enough, forms of adjectives and adverbs and things, and turns it into complete enough sentences to where you're not really guessing at all, but still are a little bit, but at least you have the full complete sentence to it. And so another big advancement is made in linguistics, and this is the point that it changes entirely. And they know that now, but it's this one guy that's kind of hidden. He's the first one, has to do with Seth. Seth comes into the pantheon of things. What is this? What happened? Did somebody die? Was he the Alpha and Omega of their earliest situation, but reborn again? Here it comes. What does this all have to do with the pantheon? And hopefully I'll get into it a little bit more as we go. So Peribsen's choice of Patreon and his rule during a shadowy period of the mid-second dynasty, the earliest of dynasties, have led Egyptologists and historians to search for possible explanations for both his name and the troubled times he lived in. The following sections discuss some of the theories that they have put forth. And so now we're going to get into this. And man, it looks like it's going to easily go into a part 2. Whenever it does, it's going to be in our top left-hand corner. And we can go to that, and it'll go to the next part of this. And, man, I don't want to hold this until I do Typhon and so on, and actually put them back to back to back, because that's probably too many hours worth of this information at once. I feel bad that I don't try to condense this into 15 minutes, but I don't think there's any way that I can. I'd have to be so sparse about it and just tell you, read this, or, or something. So anyhow, religious theories in uniting Peribsen with Seth. So there's older theories and more modern ones, but a theory was popular in the mid-20th century, supported by Egyptologists Percy Newbery and Jaroslav Cerny, and Walter Bryan Emery and Berhal Gizloff held Peribsen was a heretic, much like Akhenaten, who had sought to introduce a new monotheistic state religion into Egypt, that Seth was only the worshipped god, are going to be a high major pantheon, like Atum was there, but like Horus really was all the way through. He's held it at a peak point. There has to be somebody. It can't be just There is a pantheon that goes on there. And while it may change over time, and then the story changes over time, and because of that story change and the rest of it that's left that comes, you make a full pantheon out of it on what had happened here and there. And yeah, look at Greek stories, and some of them are just foolish sounding, but they still have kernels of truth in them, and the way things kind of went down. And if you pick it apart, it's kind of amazing. how many different cultures it has to do with and their gods and everything. And the Bible kind of has some of that in there too, but you'll never know it if you don't realize that they too are flopping back and forth between gods, and they talk about Elohim as being a plural, and that they worship Baal sometimes and then go back to some other god. And what is that? Well, that's El. Oh, okay, so when is the Yahweh thing? Yes. What? Yeah, there's Asherah too. That's the wife of El. There's Anat, like Anatolia, that is the Inanna Diana type character. There's a whole pantheon that goes on there, and the killing of Yam, the sea god, and everything that all these guys have a little idea of, and it's even in your Bible with Leviathan. And what does it have to do with Levi and Levites? Well, it has a lot to do with it. It's probably for another video, though, because I don't want to just keep running down different branches on this tree we're on right now. But so, Peribsen's actions were thought to be similar to those of the much later 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten, who had required Egyptians only to serve Aten. Newberry proposed that the priests of Horus and Seth fought each other in the manner of such as War of the Roses. And if you know about that, but it's kind of, okay, I get the parallel you're saying. During the second half of the second dynasty, so this was extremely early, and a heretic king, and known for a fact that everything came out of this okay because we didn't have an intermediate period yet. And when you see the symbol over here, it has the sun over it anyhow, but it's sun, and it's going to be the sunset. And here's a shepherd's hook, and ironically, some people say it looks like Chicago Bulls and a basketball goal, but really, it's a symbol of an urn and above water and things. And that odd, even though it's odd, it uses those symbols, but also if you took those symbols separately, it gives you something else, and it might show you where they make up names out of symbols that mean things rather than actually phonetically using symbols to represent a name, as in Hyksos and Shepherd King and things like that that do actually go together regardless of which way you put it. Right. The heretic Peribsen theory was based on three observations: that the name Peribsen was excluded from later kings' list, that the king's tomb had been destroyed and plundered during antiquity, and finally that the tomb stelae of Peribsen that once displayed the Set animal were badly scratched with the clear intention of effacing the Seth image off of it and pretty much everything else, but you can see concentrated in its Seth image wanted to take that off. And no, they didn't even try to put the bird there or do anything out of it in any way, dig deeper around it and still make a relief. It did not happen. They just kind of marked it off like nothing to see here. Egyptologists hypothesized that these were the actions of religious opponents to the Sethian priest caste. And so there might have been either an upper or lower, or two different priest castes that were really dominant versus all the rest of them. They were trying to control who was doing what, and you could say this is something like, Protestants versus Reformation people, or, kick back and forth, or you could go as far as to say something which is almost the same religion, but gets into fights like Islam and Christianity, or somewhat Christianity even to Judaism, even though they all work together. Lauer and Firth relied on the heretic Peribsen theory to explain the enormous quantity of stone vessels inscribed with the name of first and second dynasty kings found beneath Djoser's pyramid in bags bearing seals of Kasha, Quimi, and Djoser. They proposed that Peribsen had plundered the tombs of his predecessors, followers of Horus, and scattered their funerary equipment. These vessels were gathered in the royal treasury during Kaskahemwi's reign following his reunification of Egypt, and finally put beneath the step pyramid by Djoser in an act of pious devotion. So we can see that there's a little bit of didn't like you, so boom, take your crap. Or maybe even there was a point where I ain't got enough crap and you've already been generations past, plunder that tomb, or things went on. And so you wonder why we don't find any Egyptian stuff. And it's not that way after the fact all they got plundered, for pretty much what did get plundered was what was left. But all the way through it, things happens. And I've told you that all those unfinished pyramids, I believe the stones were all stole off that to even make some of the other pyramids that were there. And some of those tombs actually predate the pyramid itself. Like the hidden pyramid of El Arion, which is now kind of filled in with trash and hidden right behind a military depot that they have there. So, all right, guys, we're reaching up on 40 minutes here. Let's see if we can get just another minute into it, and we'll go to part 2, even though this paragraph will take us back to there. We're on contemporary theories, and we're going to go from that. Today, this theory, as well as Lauer and First Conclusions, is widely questioned. Archaeologists' evidence of Peribsen have been found almost entirely in Upper Egypt, not in Lower Egypt, and he looked like he ruled from there. And this red-headed Sethite that was there, in particular, his name does not appear in Lower Egyptian records surviving from that time. It's argued that Peribsen may not have ruled over all of Egypt and therefore did not have authority to force a change in state religion. Another piece of evidence argues that against the heretic Peribsen theory is the false door of the priest of Sheri at Saqqara. Sheri held office during the early 4th dynasty. The inscription on the false door connects the name of Peribsen in one sentence with another shadowy king of the 2nd dynasty, Senedj. According to the addendum, Sheri was overseer of the all-Wab priest of the king Peribsen in the necropolis of the king Senedj in his mortuary temple and at all other places. That's strange, because this implies that the funerary cult of Peribsen continued at least until the 4th dynasty, and then got enveloped into the pantheon of Seth, and then everybody had to do it, and it wasn't going to be separates. It perhaps was a reunification of the church at this time, if you will, of saying, okay, well, this all goes together. The sun comes across, he's the sunset, this is that. That's our thing now. You follow me? So, according to the addendum, Sheri was an overseer of all those people, right? And this implies that it went long, long after his reign. Additionally, Egyptologists such as Herman de Velde point out that Sheri was not the only 4th dynasty priest participating in the funerary cult of Peribsen. Inketh, probably a brother or cousin of Sheri himself, also held the title of a supervisor or Ka priest of Peribsen, and Ka has to do with the afterlife and the rebirth situation. And so we can see how this kind of goes together with the idea of the Book of the Dead, or known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. So now we're going to go, and I made it through the paragraph. And so now we're going to go to part 2 on this and continue, guys. And it's going to be on your upper left-hand corner, and we'll go there and continue on. Join me there, and we'll go farther into this rarely spoken of or known Egyptian king that became part of the pantheon. Peace.